Thank you for everyone to come to the next session, the Media Ethics in Emerging Democracies. We thought about this panel as we talk about globalization and particularly interesting in some of the countries of South Asia. Represented here on this panel are panelists from Sri Lanka, India, and Myanmar, and they will address some of the questions of democracy, the practices of democracy, questions of governance, institutional structures.
Dear friends, I thought of making some little bit of amendments to the topic. I added two more words: emerging, transitional, and threatened democracies, because I am thinking of getting 3 examples, case studies on these 3 topics, and how the issue of ethics and professional journalism being affected by these 3 contexts. I'm trying to use 3, as I told you, 3 case studies: emerging democracy, Myanmar, where we have some participants here, our friends; transitional democracy, Sri Lanka, why I will explain to you; threatened democracy, Pakistan, again we have some friends here. I'm not trying to be a master of these 2 foreign countries, but I have some experience working in these countries. So if I make any mistakes on this, please, my friends, will correct me on their own contexts. Let me start with threatened democracy. Pakistan is a very good case study for this, being a democracy as per se for some time, but half the lifetime of Pakistan has been threatened by military dictatorship. We saw the first ever smooth transition of power from a civilian government to another civilian government in the recent elections, a milestone history of Pakistan. And but the media is threatened by both military and militants, both sides. The broadcast media has a very high impact of the country. But there are a lot of issues on ethical guidelines. Very heavy competitive market with more than 100 television channels and radio channels. But we don't find any unity among the stakeholders, the owners, editors, and journalists. It's very hard to find unity among the stakeholders. My colleague Kamal will correct me if I'm wrong. And in the contrast, we find absence of a regulatory mechanism. The Pakistani Press Council is not effective as it should be, and the broadcast regulatory mechanism, PEMRA, Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority, has become a money-making machine only to sell the licenses, auction the licenses. No proper regulation. The country has about more than 70% or 80%, if I'm not mistaken, vernacular market for media, and heavy corporate agenda. So the editorial independence is affected by the corporate ownership. We have good case studies wherever you see where the ownership influences the editorial decisions. And I don't think you need any explanations on these pictures. You know what happened a couple of months ago. Is it last month, Kamal? This attack? December. This is Peshawar school attack, where Aftab, how many children killed? 140 children were killed. It's a military school. And this was the recent classic case study for media ethics, especially in visual context. Most of the pictures, sensible pictures, were issued by the military. Unethical pictures were issued by the military. And newspapers were careful on how to use them. But this story still remains in the air of Pakistan. There are plenty of examples like this, but I picked up the most recent one, where media ethics is challenged in the competitive market, in heavy conflict, where blood is everywhere, in different contexts, different theaters. Myanmar, emerging democracy, opened its media after 50 years of heavy censorship and military rule after 50 years. And now media is becoming the most vibrant tool in democracy. When it opened, it had no idea about ethics, but the country had no option. The ex-military rulers had no option but to open up. When it opened up, there was no regulatory mechanism. No media laws yet. The interim press council of my colleague Mincho is a member, still trying to figure out where they fit into the system. And in contrast, you find 13 armed conflicts around the country, and all are in ceasefire agreements now, not agreements, peace talks, talks on talks, and this will turn into a long-term ceasefire agreement very soon. National ceasefire agreement, they call it. So there was a huge demand when we open up a country out of military dictatorship of half a century. Where is the skills to handle this conflict? People like my friend Nyan Lin will go to very far to report the story without any ethical guideline, without any ethics training, at least to understand the conflict. So last year, there was a rapid program by us to train 400 journalists in 6 months. There are 2 trainers here, Nyan Lin and Mincho, who did the training. Fantastic program to train them on ethics and how to deal with conflicts. And it was a hands-on program. So these were the issues in the emerging democracy, how you handle these issues. And now, with the democracy coming in, the cronies are becoming the media moguls, the stereotype story that we hear everywhere. On the other hand, Myanmar is facing this religious extremism, Buddhist-Muslim clashes. They erupt anywhere at any time. So the media is very confused about these stories, how to handle them. But I must say, we'll talk about it tomorrow. I thought of sharing some experience tomorrow with you. How these very sensitive stories were covered by both social media and the conventional media. Sri Lanka. Why I put Sri Lanka as a transitional democracy? The democracy was threatened by a 30-year war, conflict. 5 years ago, we militarily defeated the troublemakers, but the the process is not yet started. So we cannot say it's a post-conflict country, it's a post-war country. Threat to democracy. In the political theater, we saw for the last 5 years, the freedom of expression was curtailed, institutions were destabilized. So the democracy was in the downturn. But we saw a historic election on January 8th, where the system was changed, and the main slogan was democracy. So what is the role in the transition? Largely positive, but Sri Lankan media is not an active media. It's a passive media. We follow the media follow the people. The media does not take the lead. Again, no broadcast regulation in this country. And the regulatory mechanism in the print, we are confused because we have press councils and we have the Press Complaints Commission. I think this is the only country we have 2 systems, except Zimbabwe, if I'm not mistaken. In the contrast, the military war finished, but we have this, again, like Myanmar, we have a parallel system problem here of religious extremism. But now, after this post-election scenario, We expect this to go down because the state sponsorship it had would be diminished, quote unquote. But these are good political tools to any other group. In any case, I would like to share some of our research work here on the ethics and the professional standards. We did a comprehensive research 2 years ago. We finished it 2 years ago to ascertain, especially focus on vernacular press and print media, to identify the factors to lead the ethnically biased news. So we have hypotheses, we had problem statements, very academic, very systematic research. And methodology, we had all components into interviews, case studies, news story analysis, peer review discussions, sample readership surveys. So we had a conclusion, say, yes, the vernacular press in Sri Lanka is ethnically biased in its reporting, we concluded. But it's nothing to do with the conflict. It's an inherited problem within the newsroom. Because the reportage analysis was before the conflict, during the conflict, and after the conflict. So the outputs are same. The results are same. So the conflict had nothing to do with the professional standard. It's an inherited issue. Out of 150 news stories we analyzed, only 5% had at the least minimum requirement to be ethical story, professional story. Why it happened? We found out about 7 reasons. The first one is the mindset of the journalist. And the second was the sources. They do the manipulation. And the journalists are highly dependent on the sources. They never double check, they never cross check. And the corporate ownership, the mindset of the owners. And he said the agenda, the interest of the owner. Who runs the news desk? Is the news editor or the owner? Of course, it's the owner. The advertisers, they cut the legs. And then the government, because the accusation normally comes on the government first. No, the problem is with us. For me, the government comes very below the agenda. Then the non-state actors, the militants or whoever. And lastly, the market, on your own market. You can't disturb the market. So these are the reasons we found that affect the unprofessional standard in the vernacular press. We found some barriers. First one is language. Language in the sense, they only read their own language. They will never read, they cannot read the other languages, either Tamil or English or other single languages. Vice versa. And rigid conventional practice in the newsroom. Sorry to use this word, dinosaurs dominating the newsroom. They are not flexible. They don't allow new thinking. They don't think out of the box. Please, this is about the vernacular press. And absence of the ethnic diversity. At that time, within the single newsrooms, we had only one Tamil working in the entire single newsrooms. So how you bring the ethnic diversity to the newsroom, to your content? Poor working conditions, we are the heroes, but the lesser paid people. Our pockets are always empty, but we boast of the best profession in the world, and now it's become the dangerous profession in the world, but still with empty pockets. And absence of proper legal environment. We had a set of recommendations. We need proper systems to upbring the journalist. It's not just capacity building. It's a systematic upbringing of a journalist. And we need proper regulatory framework defined with policies and improve the capacity of the gatekeepers. There is no point of teaching the young journalists if the gatekeepers are still in the 60s or 50s. And we need a strong civil society, media literate civil society, who understand the media, who understand his master's voice. And lastly, good media laws to support a good environment. Otherwise, any piecemeal tinkering won't do. Any media reform process for professional media landscape, we need to address we need a holistic process to address a bigger picture. Would be happy to entertain any questions. Thank you for now.
Thank you for giving us some really good food for thought as we discuss the challenges of democratic media and democracy in South Asia. Next in line is Dr. Vipul Mudgal, who's going to talk about media ethics in India.
Thank you, Professor Rao. Good morning, everybody. I'm mostly going to talk about India, but these are examples of corporate control of the media. I don't have a presentation, but these are based on what I'm going to talk about is a little bit, probably I'll try to give a few examples, concrete examples, because we would be able to gather, the kind of pressures and the kind of things which work on journalists' mind, in media atmosphere in which we work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about media, markets, and democracy in the framework of ethics. So let me start with some examples, and the examples are from the point of view of parliamentary oversight. In 2008, in India, there was a lobby which is still there. It is the lobby of the biscuit manufacturers. Now, the biscuit manufacturers went around contacting the members of parliament. They contacted about 40, 50 members of parliament. Each one of them wrote letters to Minister of Human Resources Development, Education Minister, food ministers in different departments, asking them to change the midday meal scheme. Now, the midday meal scheme in India is a huge scheme where cooked, fresh, hot meals are served to a very large number of children. I mean, in India, everything is big. So we are talking about 114 million children. If it had been a country, it would be probably world's fourth largest or fifth largest. I don't know. So the pitch was that children need nutrients. They need micronutrients. They need iron. They need, all kinds of little mineral requirements. So let us give everything to them packed in the biscuits. So the pitch was that you take away the midday meal scheme and let us give them biscuits, okay? And these members of parliament were writing letters to the ministers saying that, how this is the best thing to do. After all, children eat at home also, and, they need iron. We'll give them iron. Different places have different problems and things like that. And every time a letter would be written, a press release will be given to the media, and media will report that how so-and-so has made an appeal to the minister saying that, children in my area are suffering from this particular deficiency, and this can be, removed by giving them biscuits. Now, somebody was doing, now this is a question of oversight, somebody was doing a little research on this, and the research was extremely rudimentary. It was not really going into qualitative, quantitative aspects. It was just reading the letters. So somebody, and I know that in this, yesterday also in the meeting we were talking about the right to information. A lot of people are in all these countries talking about right to information, and I'm showing you how right to information works in this case. Now, a normal citizen had filed a right to information application asking for those letters which came to a particular ministry. So my guess is that there were about 28 or 29 letters which came. They were given to the, Supreme Court of India had appointed the commissioners whose job it was to find out more facts about what kind of food needs to be given to the poor people. It was part of the food security law. And the midday meal is also part of the same food security law. So the long and short of it is that finally, the letters revealed that the language written by one member of parliament from this part of India and another member of parliament from completely different part of India speaks different language had written exactly the same text. You know, can you imagine? Exactly the same text. Just remove iron with folic acid with fluoride, fluoride with something else, and then fill in the blanks and the same letter. So, you know, what media was doing its job. Media, I don't think it was, if you ask a media person in Odisha, that did he do, she do a faithful reporting of the letter written by the member of parliament, she wouldn't know that another member of parliament from Assam, which is like, 2,000 kilometers away, has also written something like that. But because there is an institution of RTI, and because one citizen got that information and it came to an institution called the Commissioners of Food, Right to Food Campaign, and those commissioners actually gave it out. And finally, an economist called Jean Drèze, who's a famous economist, poverty economist you can call him in short, he and Ritika Khera, who teaches economics in IIT Delhi, they wrote an article in Hindustan Times saying that, this is what has happened. And suddenly, this lobby retreated, the biscuit lobby retreated. Now, there was a raging debate in Indian media about whether the cooked meals are better or ready-to-eat meals are better, or biscuits are better. Can the nutrients be given this way? What is the absorption of young bodies of nutrients? It was a huge debate. But the point is that the whole debate started with somebody filing an RTI somewhere, and then the media coming to it. So it's not that the media itself will do all the investigation and go to the truth, hunt it down, and actually write it like that. They work, they have their anxieties, they have the pressures that work on them. That's my story number one. The story number two is of the GM crops. There's a company called Monsanto. We all know it. So these companies, between 3 or 4 companies, Cargill and Monsanto and a couple more, they literally control the world seed market, food market, genetically modified crop market. So they took a trip of journalists to a place in Maharashtra called Vidarbha. Now Vidarbha is a place which is the epicenter of farmer suicides. And I think you know that a very large number of farmers in India are committing suicide because they are not able to get a good return on their crops. And when there is a specter of hunger, for their children, the children will have to be taken out from the schools, etc. Then it's becoming contagious and very dangerous that farmers are committing suicides. So they went to that suicide belt, and a lot of journalists, we all know that, I mentioned that in my question, that they go for junkets and they wine and dine and they ask questions and they see places and then they write. So the stories were written in which they said that, there are, in these 2 villages, there are no suicides, farmers have become very prosperous and they are buying SUVs and things like that. So then 2 years later, I mean, it was a non-event, it came and it finished. 2 years later, in 2011, when the Parliament of India was discussing an extremely important law on genetically modified crop. It was called the Biotech Regulatory Authority Bill of India, BRAI. Then the company tried to do that again. The time was very limited, so they could not take journalists again to a junket. So what they did was they used the same stories carried in some newspapers 2 years ago as advertisements. So now first you spend money on journalists, take them there, get the favorable reports written, and then later in this particular copy was Times of India newspaper, one of India's world's top newspapers in terms of circulation. There was one full page saying reaping gold through BT cotton. And, then there's another famous journalist in India. I mean, it's the story I'm telling you, but actually the credit goes to P. Sainath, who's a, like hunger economist, he's a hunger journalist. So he actually tracked it down, connected the dots, and actually wrote about it, saying that how come 2.5 years back you removed poverty from these two villages through BT cotton, and now doing that again through the advertising route. So then it so happened that there was a parliamentary standing committee on food. So when the controversy arose, when one journalist wrote about it, the parliamentary standing committee decided to go to those villages again. Now when they went to those villages, they realized that the testimonies of the same farmers revealed that not only was it completely wrong that there had been no suicides in those villages. In fact, in one of the villages, there were 14 suicides by then. And then in a few years preceding this, and a few years after that, there were another 9 suicides. Okay, so now this is, again, we are talking about institutions. Now the institution of Parliamentary Standing Committee, whose job not only is to discuss bills in Parliament, bring out the real issues, but also raise questions and do investigation. So all investigation media will not do. Some other institutions will also do. Because of the Parliamentary Standing Committee,